It's been 2 years since that chilling encounter, and I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there, watching, waiting. I've debated sharing this story, fearing the world might think I'm mad, but I can't keep it to myself any longer. This is my true, creepy stalker horror story, and every word of it is real. I was just a college freshman living away from home for the first time. The bustling city seemed like the perfect place for a young man like me to spread his wings. I shared a small apartment with my roommate Mark, who was as excited about the college experience as I was. The campus was massive, and the city, with its labyrinthine streets and hidden alleys, held an allure that was both enchanting and intimidating. The first sign that something was off came when I began noticing a stranger at every turn. He was a lanky man with disheveled hair and a faded leather jacket that looked several sizes too big. He never made eye contact, but he was always there, on the way to class, in the library, and even outside our apartment building. I initially brushed it off as coincidence, but the unease grew with each sighting. One chilly October evening, Mark and I decided to hit a local diner for some late-night grub. The usual route took us past a dimly lit alley that reeked of urine and decay. I suddenly spotted him again, lurking in the shadows, his eyes concealed beneath a tattered hat. Panic seized my chest, and I grabbed Mark's arm, pointing toward the alley. "Mark, that's him! That's the guy who's been following me!" I whispered urgently. Mark squinted into the darkness but couldn't see anything unusual. "Dude, you're paranoid. Maybe it's just some homeless guy. Come on, let's eat." I reluctantly followed Mark into the diner, but my appetite had vanished. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching, just beyond the threshold of the alley. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated. The stalker began sending me cryptic messages. They came in the form of handwritten notes slid under our apartment door. Each note was more disturbing than the last, filled with detailed descriptions of my daily activities. He knew when I woke up, what classes I attended, and even what I ate for breakfast. I didn't dare share this with Mark. He wouldn't believe me, and I was afraid he'd think I was losing my mind. I was also too embarrassed to involve the campus police, convinced they would dismiss my claims. So I started documenting everything, taking photos of each note, and noting the times and places I spotted him. One particularly unnerving message arrived on a rainy Wednesday. It simply said, "I know what you're hiding, and I won't stop until you reveal it." It felt as if he had plunged a dagger into my heart. What did he mean? I couldn't fathom how he had gained access to my darkest secrets. One night, as I lay awake in my bed, fear gripping me like a vice, I heard a faint scratching at the window. I slowly got up, my heart pounding in my chest. My room was on the second floor, and there was no way anyone could reach the window without a ladder. But there he was, clinging to the ledge, his face obscured by the darkness. I screamed for Mark, who burst into the room just in time to see the man disappearing into the night. "I told you, Mark! I'm not making this up!" I shouted, my voice trembling. Mark finally believed me, and we decided to call the police. They arrived quickly, and I recounted my harrowing experiences. They searched the vicinity but found no trace of the stalker. All they could do was increase patrols in our area. Despite their efforts, the stalker continued to torment me. The notes became increasingly deranged, filled with threats of violence and disturbing drawings. My grades suffered, and I could hardly concentrate on my studies. Sleep became a luxury, as each creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves outside filled me with dread. One fateful night, Mark and I returned from a party, slightly tipsy and exhausted. As we entered our apartment, we froze in our tracks. The living room was in shambles. Our belongings were strewn across the floor, and the walls were covered in chilling messages scrawled in red paint. "I told you, I know what you're hiding," read one message. "I'm closer than you think," read another. We called the police again, and this time they took the situation seriously. They dusted for fingerprints, collected evidence, and even stationed an officer outside our apartment. But the stalker proved elusive, like a shadow that couldn't be captured. With no leads, we decided to take matters into our own hands. Mark and I began researching self-defense techniques and purchased pepper spray. We barely left the apartment after dark, always on edge, always looking over our shoulders. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, I received a message on my phone. It was a video, taken from outside our apartment window. The camera zoomed in on my face, distorted with fear as I sat at my desk. A cold sweat drenched my back as I realized the stalker had been watching me from mere feet away. That was the breaking point. Mark and I packed our bags and moved to a different city, enrolling in a new college under assumed names. The stalking finally ceased, but the scars remained. I still have nightmares, and I can't trust strangers anymore. I often wonder who that man was and what he wanted from me. The true horror of it all was that he never showed his face, always lurking in the shadows, an unseen presence that haunted my every step. Even now, in this new city, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, searching for any sign that he might still be out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I've always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural and the eerie tales that people spun. Horror movies were nothing more than fictional recreations designed to send shivers down your spine, but they could never truly replicate the bone-chilling dread that I felt during those dreadful months in my life. This is a true story, a creepy stalker horror story that unfolded in my life, something I can never forget. It all began when I moved to a quiet suburban neighborhood. The place was a far cry from the bustling city I had grown up in. I relished the solitude and peace that the suburbs offered. My new house was a charming little two-story cottage, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. It was idyllic, or so I thought. The first inkling that something was amiss came when I noticed the neighbors across the street. There was an elderly couple who lived there, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They were friendly enough, always waving when I stepped out, but there was something strange about their eyes, something unsettling that I couldn't put my finger on. They would watch me, unblinking, like they were sizing me up. I brushed it off as paranoia, attributing it to my overactive imagination. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling of unease refused to leave. I'd find myself looking over my shoulder, feeling eyes on my back. One evening, as I was watching TV, I noticed a shadow moving outside my window. I cautiously peeked through the curtains and saw nothing. It must have been a trick of the light, I thought. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. A silhouette, just beyond the edge of my vision. The following week, I decided to confront the Johnsons about their unsettling behavior. As I approached their house, I could see them through the living room window. They were huddled together, whispering and glancing towards my direction. When I knocked on their door, they opened it, feigning surprise. "Hello there, young man," Mr. Johnson greeted me, his voice quivering. I tried to remain composed. "I couldn't help but notice that you both have been watching me lately. Is there something you need?" Mrs. Johnson exchanged a quick glance with her husband before speaking. "Oh dear, it's just that you remind us so much of our son. He used to live in your house, you see." Their words sent a chill down my spine. The house had been on the market for years before I bought it. "I see. Well, I don't mean to intrude, but could you please stop watching me? It's making me uncomfortable." They both nodded, their expressions strangely blank. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Johnson said. I left their house feeling even more unsettled than before. That night, I kept a close eye on my surroundings. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I thought perhaps my talk with the Johnsons had worked, and I could finally have some peace. But I was wrong. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard faint whispering outside my window. I couldn't make out the words, but the voices sounded eerily familiar. I mustered the courage to peek through the curtains, and there, standing in the shadows, were Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They were staring straight at me, their eyes wide and vacant. I shouted, "What are you doing?" They didn't respond. Instead, they began to chant in a low, guttural tone that sent shivers down my spine. Their voices grew louder and more frantic, and suddenly the entire house seemed to vibrate with their eerie incantations. I had no choice but to call the police. When the officers arrived, they found no trace of the Johnsons. They assured me that they would look into the matter and left me with a sense of dread that refused to dissipate. The nights grew even colder, and my house felt like a prison. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft tapping on my bedroom window. It was faint, almost rhythmic. My heart raced as I got out of bed and cautiously approached the window. I pulled back the curtains, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was Mrs. Johnson, her pale face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was whispering something incoherent, her voice a mere breath. I stumbled back, horrified, and as I did, I noticed another figure behind her. It was Mr. Johnson, his face contorted into a grotesque grin. He held something in his hand, something sharp and gleaming. Before I could react, he began to etch strange symbols onto the window, all the while maintaining that eerie smile. It was a nightmare come to life. I called the police again, and this time they arrived with more urgency. The Johnsons were apprehended, and their house was searched. What they found inside was beyond anything I could have imagined. The walls were covered in photographs of me, taken without my knowledge. There were journals filled with disturbing, rambling entries about me, detailing my every move. The Johnsons were committed to a mental institution, and I was finally free from their relentless stalking. But the scars they left behind would haunt me forever. I moved away from that house, from that neighborhood, but I couldn't escape the feeling that their eyes were still on me, even from behind the padded walls of their cell. I can still remember that cold, eerie night like it was yesterday. It was the kind of night where the darkness seemed to stretch on forever, and the moon hid behind a thick blanket of ominous clouds. My name is David, and I'm about to share with you a true creepy stalker horror story that still sends shivers down my spine. It all began innocently enough. I was living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled deep within the woods. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was peaceful, but little did I know that peace would soon be shattered. One evening, as I sat in my dimly lit living room, engrossed in a book, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the wind or my overactive imagination. But then it came again, slightly louder this time. It sounded like a faint, raspy voice, as if someone were struggling to speak. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "David?" the voice whispered, sending chills down my spine. It was as if the night itself was speaking to me. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source of the sound. My mind raced with paranoia, wondering if someone had broken into my house. I grabbed a flashlight and began to search every nook and cranny of my home, but there was no one there. I started to doubt my sanity, thinking perhaps I was losing my mind. Maybe it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. Over the next few weeks, the whispers continued, always in the dead of night. They were faint, unintelligible, but they were there. I couldn't escape them. I even considered moving out of my home, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon the place I had called home for years. One evening, I decided to stay up and confront whatever was tormenting me. As the clock struck midnight, the whispers began anew. I followed the sound, creeping through the darkened corridors of my house until I found myself in my basement. The whispering was louder here, as if it were emanating from the very walls themselves. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the room, and that's when I saw it. A small crack in the concrete wall, barely noticeable in the dim light. I approached it cautiously, and as I did, the whispering grew clearer. "David, I see you!" the voice hissed. "I'm always watching!" I recoiled in horror, realizing that the voice was coming from inside the wall. Panic surged through me, and I rushed back upstairs. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The next day, I contacted a contractor to inspect the wall. It wasn't long before they discovered a hidden chamber concealed behind the concrete. Inside, they found a cramped, makeshift room with a bed, a chair, and a collection of old photographs. My heart sank as I looked at the pictures, realizing that they were all of me, taken from a distance, without my knowledge. The police were called immediately, and an investigation was launched. They combed through the photographs and discovered that the stalker had been observing me for months, maybe even years. They found notes written in a shaky hand, detailing my daily routines and habits. The whispering, however, remained a mystery. There was no one inside the hidden chamber, and the voice couldn't be traced to any external source. It was as if it had been conjured from thin air. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder and more menacing. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, and I was slowly unraveling. The police were no closer to finding the person responsible, and I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Then, one fateful night, as I lay in bed, bathed in cold sweat, the whispering reached a crescendo. It was no longer a mere voice, it was a cacophony of torment, echoing in my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. In a fit of desperation, I grabbed a sledgehammer and smashed through the wall where the whispers originated. The room beyond was empty, but the sound was deafening. I screamed, begging for it to stop, but it only grew louder, filling my head with a maddening cacophony. That's when I realized the horrifying truth. The whispering wasn't external, it was inside me. I was the one hearing those tormented voices. It was as if the stalker had crawled into my mind, burrowing deep within my consciousness. I was taken to a psychiatric hospital where I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. The doctors said that my mind had created the stalker as a coping mechanism for some deep-seated trauma. They told me the stalker was not real, but I knew the truth. To this day, I hear the whispers, even in the sterile, white-walled confines of the hospital. The stalker is with me always, tormenting me, never letting me forget. I can't escape the darkness that lurks in the corners of my mind, and I fear that I never will. So, when you hear a whisper in the dead of night, be wary. It might not be a stranger lurking in the shadows. It might be something far more sinister, something that can never be escaped. As I sit here, bathed in the dim glow of my laptop screen, I can't help but shudder at the memories that have haunted me for years. It's a story I've never dared to share, fearing that the terror I experienced might somehow find its way back into my life. But tonight, I've decided that the world needs to know what happened to me. So, I'll recount the true events that left me forever scarred, a prisoner of my own fear. It all began innocently enough. I was a 17-year-old boy, navigating the tumultuous waters of high school. My friends and I, always on the lookout for a new thrill, decided to explore the abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Little did we know that this decision would set off a chain of events that would lead to my living nightmare. The factory, an imposing structure made of crumbling bricks and rusted metal, had an aura of dread that was impossible to ignore. Graffiti covered the walls, telling a story of the countless souls who had ventured here before us. We were drawn to the place like moths to a flame, curiosity overpowering our better judgment. As we explored the eerie corridors, our flashlights flickering in the oppressive darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Every creaking floorboard, every whisper of the wind seemed like an ominous warning. But my friends brushed off my unease, chalking it up to nerves. Hours passed, and we had nearly exhausted the mysteries of the abandoned factory. Just as we were about to call it a night and head back home, I stumbled upon a hidden door concealed behind a stack of decaying crates. It was small, almost like an afterthought, but it led to a narrow, winding staircase that descended into an even darker abyss. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. My friends tried to dissuade me, but something inexplicable drew me down those stairs. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over me like a shroud as I descended deeper into the earth. At the bottom of the staircase, I found myself in a narrow tunnel. The walls were lined with photographs, thousands of them, all featuring different people. It was as if I had stumbled upon the twisted obsession of a deranged artist. I reached out to touch one of the pictures, and that's when I noticed something chilling. The faces in the photographs were contorted in fear, their eyes filled with a terror that was all too real. My heart raced as I realized the gravity of the situation. I had stumbled upon something sinister, something that defied all reason. I quickly turned to leave, but that's when I heard it, a soft, echoing laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Panic set in as I retraced my steps through the winding tunnel. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I could hear my own ragged breath, the pounding of my heart, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing through the tunnel as I desperately tried to escape whatever malevolent presence pursued me. The laughter grew louder, more manic, and it seemed to be closing in. I burst out of the tunnel, emerging into the abandoned factory, and ran as fast as my trembling legs could carry me. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my home, locking every door and window behind me. That night, I lay awake, plagued by nightmares and the haunting laughter that echoed in my mind. The days that followed were filled with dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the sinister presence from the factory was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I became reclusive, avoiding my friends and even skipping school. One evening, as I peered out of my bedroom window, I saw a figure standing across the street, partially obscured by the darkness. It was impossible to make out any features, but I could feel its gaze fixed on me. My heart raced as I slammed the curtains shut, convinced that I was still being pursued by the malevolent force I had encountered in the factory. Days turned into weeks, and my fear only deepened. The figure outside my window became a nightly ritual, a silent tormentor that never wavered. I confided in my parents, who dismissed my claims as the product of an overactive imagination. They urged me to see a therapist, convinced that I was suffering from paranoia. But I knew the truth. I had stumbled upon something unspeakably evil in that abandoned factory, something that had latched onto me and refused to let go. The laughter, the photographs, the relentless stalking. It was all too real, and it was driving me to the brink of madness. I wish I could say that this story has a happy ending, that I somehow managed to escape the clutches of my tormentor. But the truth is, I'm writing this from a dimly lit room, my heart heavy with the knowledge that the figure outside my window has never left me. It watches, it waits, and it laughs, a chilling, haunting laughter that will haunt me for the rest of my days. So as I sit here, bathed in the dim glow of my laptop screen, I can't help but shudder at the memories that have haunted me for years. And I can't escape the horrifying truth that my true, creepy stalker horror story is far from over.